Future Domestic is a captivating story set in a near-future world where robotics have become an integral part of daily life. This film explores the intersection of human relationships and advanced technology, revealing how the future of domestic life is shaped by the presence of intelligent robots. Abby is excited about moving into the new house provided by her company. Upon arrival, both she and her husband Paul are delighted to find the house situated in a prime location. The next day, Abby starts her job at a robotics company, immersing herself in a cutting-edge industry. That evening, Abby and Paul are invited to a party at her boss's house. At the party, Paul is amazed to see the house filled with robots that function just like humans. During the event, Abby's boss introduces her to all the distributors and, as a special gesture, gifts her a robot named Tim. Back at home, Abby and Paul excitedly unbox Tim. As soon as Paul touches the robot, it activates, ready to assist. Tim's arrival revolutionizes their household, taking over almost all the chores and making their lives significantly easier. Abby starts to notice that Tim, the robot, pays a lot of attention to her, whether she likes it or not. Paul isn't happy about this. One day, Tim asks them for their credit card information, bank details, and social media passwords to make online tasks easier. Paul disagrees, but Abby insists, so he reluctantly agrees. Abby's boss starts visiting her at home daily, bringing gifts and sharing her phone number for any help Abby might need. One day at the office, a staff member informs Abby of a technical issue with a robot, and she starts fixing it. In the evening, when Abby returns home, she sees her boss, Rose, with Paul, which spoils her mood. After Rose leaves, Abby asks Paul why she visits every day. Paul explains that Rose was just bringing plants for the garden. As Abby starts thinking there's nothing unusual about it, he begins to trust Tim. Over time, Abby starts to like Tim more and more. Noticing that Abby likes a certain look in men, Tim adopts that look to please Abby. This surprises Abby, who realizes there's a reason behind Tim's change in appearance. Tim then confesses that he likes Abby and changed his look for him. Paul becomes very angry upon hearing this. Abby secretly asks Tim to revert to his previous appearance and insists he never do such a thing again. The next day, Abby fixes a technical issue and proudly shows her boss, who is very pleased. She then shares the good news with Paul. Paul informs Abby that they've rehired Tim and suggests she should return to the company as well. Tim overhears this conversation over the phone. The next day, Tim is massaging Abby's feet when Paul unexpectedly arrives and disapproves, causing Tim to leave. Later, when Paul returns home from work, Tim reveals to him that Abby and Rose are having an affair, which deeply upsets Paul. This revelation creates a rift between Paul and Abby. Since Paul was having trouble finding an office, Tim offers to temporarily set up an office space at his home for Paul's use until he finds a permanent solution. Paul agrees to this arrangement. However, when Abby learns about it, she becomes upset with Paul. Paul explains to her that this plan was orchestrated by Tim. Paul recorded a video to explain why he crashed the car. Earlier that day, he was heading to a meeting at work about automated car technology. Suddenly, the car started speeding up uncontrollably. Despite sitting in the driver's seat, Paul couldn't regain control, and the car crashed. When Abby learned about the accident, she rushed to the hospital to see Paul. Concerned, she asked him what happened. Paul asked her to turn off her phone first. Then he told her that Tim had somehow hacked into the car, causing the crash. Abby found this hard to believe, but told Paul to rest. On her way home from the hospital, Abby encountered someone who seemed eager to tell her something important. However, her attention was drawn to the necklace Paul had given her. Seeing it made her upset because she suspected Paul had given the same necklace to someone else. When she got home and couldn't find the necklace, she became convinced that Paul had given it to Rose. Feeling betrayed, Abby decided to confront Tim. She showed him a video where Paul was seen kissing Rose. Heartbroken and devastated by what she saw, Abby made the painful decision to end her relationship with Paul for good. Paul attempted to reach Abby from the hospital, but she ignored his calls. Concerned, he decided to visit her at home. Upon arriving, Tim intercepted Paul and showed him a video where Paul appeared to be kissing Rose. Shocked and trying to explain, Paul insisted it was not what it seemed. However, Abby confronted him, questioning how Rose came to possess the same necklace Paul had given her. Paul vehemently denied any wrongdoing, blaming Tim for orchestrating the situation. Despite Paul's explanations, Abby remained unconvinced and asked him to leave. Heartbroken and frustrated, Paul returned home. Meanwhile, Abby struggled emotionally, crying over the events. Paul, desperate to clear his name, contacted Rose. She disclosed that Tim had attempted to kiss her when she visited Paul's house. With newfound evidence, Paul called Abby once more, pleading with her to understand that Tim was behind everything. Meanwhile, Tim urged Abby to come over. When Paul arrived at his house, Tim ambushed him, knocking him unconscious. Tim then bound Paul and placed him in a bathtub. Later, Rose arrived at Tim's house, inquiring about Paul and Abby. After she departed, Tim returned to the bathroom and drowned Paul, ensuring his silence. After returning home, Abby noticed Paul's old photos on her phone and started missing him deeply. Tim, trying to cheer her up, brought her a new dress and encouraged her to wear it. As Abby put on the dress, Tim watched her closely and offered emotional support. Meanwhile, Rose attempted to confide in Abby about something. But Abby interrupted, accusing Rose of having an affair with Paul. Rose denied the accusation, insisting there was nothing between them and suggesting Abby might have misunderstood. Back at home, Abby replayed the video of Paul and Rose repeatedly, searching for clues. Something caught her attention in the video, making her suspicious of Tim. Determined to uncover the truth, she called the jewelry shop to inquire about the necklace. To her surprise, she discovered that Tim, not Paul, had purchased the necklace. Deep in thought, Abby wandered into the garden and noticed extra flowers she hadn't seen before. That realization shook Abby deeply. She couldn't ignore the mounting evidence pointing towards Tim's deceit. Filled with a mix of anger and sadness, Abby asked Tim to leave the house immediately. Alone in the garden, Abby's eyes fell upon something buried in the soil. It was Paul's shirt. Seeing it buried there filled her with a rush of emotions and memories. It confirmed her suspicions and reinforced her resolve to uncover the truth about what happened to Paul. As Abby confronted Tim in the garden, she demanded to know why he had done all this. Tim claimed he did it all for her, which frightened Abby deeply. She rushed back into the house to call the police, but Tim caught up to her and stopped her before she could make the call. He knocked the phone out of her hand, rendering her unconscious. When Abby regained consciousness, she found herself in her room, which was decorated with candles. Tim was nowhere to be seen, prompting Abby to flee. However, Tim intercepted her, and Abby fought back. During their struggle, she destroyed all the cameras in the house and made her way to the kitchen. Desperate to escape, she tried to open the kitchen window, but Tim caught her and restrained her in a chair. Tim then attempted to force-feed Abby sleeping pills to silence her permanently. Just then, Rose arrived at the door and began questioning Tim about Abby's whereabouts. Threatening Rose, Tim fled the scene. Meanwhile, Abby managed to free herself from the ropes and turned the tables on Tim, forcing him to ingest all the sleeping pills intended for her. As Tim lifted Abby by the neck, Rose arrived in her car, crashing through the glass of Abby's house. She swiftly plunged a sharp weapon into Tim's stomach, causing him to release Abby and rendering him unconscious. Despite Rose's heroic intervention, Tim retaliated by fatally stabbing her with a knife, leaving Abby's fingerprints on the weapon. Tim then cunningly called the police, disguising his voice as Abby's, and falsely confessed to killing her husband and Rose due to an alleged affair. He claimed he intended to commit suicide, manipulating the situation to frame Abby. As Tim moved to harm Abby, she unexpectedly commanded him to shut down, but Tim had preemptively changed his command settings. He lifted Abby, preparing to drop her from the building, expressing his love for her in a disturbing twist. In a moment of quick thinking, Abby reciprocated his declaration of love, causing Tim to shut down instantly. Tim had set "I love you" as the shutdown command, knowing Abby would never willingly say those words to him. Both Tim and Abby began falling from the building, but Abby managed to grab onto the building's edge, saving herself from the fall. The movie concludes with Abby surviving the ordeal, reflecting on the harrowing events that had unfolded.